You may have noticed that the I-130 petition instructions for spouses list just a handful of things that you need to prove that you are in what's called a bona fide marriage relationship, which means that you are married because you want to join your lives together, not because one of you is doing the other a favor and helping you get a green card. So if you look at those instructions, it just basically says a couple of things like birth certificates of your kids and property if you own it together and a couple of other things. Well, guess what? Unfortunately, even if you were to send all those things in, that's typically not enough evidence to actually get your I-130 approved. So this video here today is designed to help you know, whether you're working with an attorney or you're doing this yourself, what types of evidence you're really going to need to truly prove that you have a bona fide relationship so you can start collecting it and that you can be prepared. And hopefully your I-130 gets approved on the first go without requests for evidence and all the runaround that you can get if you don't send enough stuff in the first time. Sometimes that happens even if you do send enough stuff in, but we can always improve our chances, right? So, okay, we're going to go through each category. One thing I wanted to say quickly before we start talking about the categories, though, is that it helps to know exactly what we're trying to do here. So basically, the government is going to look kind of suspiciously at every application. They're always thinking in the back of their mind, now, is this couple trying to trick us and they're not really together? They don't really intend to join their lives together? Or is this a legit, couple? They look like a married couple. Everything kind of adds up, like the story makes sense. So, when you hear what they're looking for, you're going to realize that every single couple is going to have actually a fairly different sort of application. There are kind of general standard lists out there that exist, and I have one myself as well. But every single application should look different. When the officer looks over your application, they should basically be able to say, yeah, they look like a couple. I believe that. Like, that looks about right. That's what we're going for, to translate that onto paper. So the first category, of course, if you are in the situation where you have children in common, whether you've adopted a child together or had a biological child together, certainly including evidence of that is probably the best kind of evidence you can have of your relationship being serious. Now, don't go having children if you don't want children or aren't ready for children just because you think it'll help your immigration case. I would say that's definitely not worth it. Love kids, love my kids, but don't do that for immigration purposes. Sometimes people tell me that there are myths in the community that you really can't file if you don't have kids or you don't own a house together, and that's definitely not true. But if you have kids together, lead with that for sure. So that would include the birth certificates or the adoption documentation of your child. And then, ideally some cute photos too of you as a family and doing family type things together with your child or children. The next category, showing that you have a joint residence together. So meaning that you live together. Now, if you don't live together, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. There are certainly plenty of couples where the I-130 is being done while one of the partners is living abroad. The foreign partner is living abroad, and they actually just can't be together until this application is approved. So don't worry if that's your situation. This won't directly apply to you. But if you are living together, then certainly that's a great thing to prove that you have a bona fide relationship. So some things to start with there would be either a lease or a rental agreement if you're currently renting a place. Keep in mind that, no matter what your situation is in this moment, you may have actually had previous leases or rental agreements from times past, and that's also great evidence. Even though you're no longer in that particular property, you can show not only are we living together now, but we've moved together. And if you stay together through a move, then, your relationship is on solid ground. Am I the only one that hates moving like that? It's definitely a thing. So you can show past prior residence in addition to your current residence. If you've purchased a house together, then a copy of your property deed is great evidence. Obviously, that you're in it for the long haul. You can also submit things like utility bills, gas, water, electric, internet, things like that. Nobody has cable anymore. That used to be a thing. But whatever kind of actual home bills you have, you can have copies of those. I have people frequently ask, hey, we don't actually have our names on these together. It's sort of like one of the partners set up some of the accounts and the other one set up the other account. And you can actually also use maybe the first partner has their name on the internet and the other partner has their name on the electric. But if we're showing that you're each paying and receiving these bills over time to that same address, then that's still proof that you're living together, even though you're not on the exact same bill. Although in the future, you may want to, in the future, as you're opening accounts, think about adding both people on there just for lots of reasons. First of all, when you call because you have a problem, you want to both be authorized to fix the problem. Also from experience, just mentioning that, but also for immigration purposes, having your name on the same name on accounts is always helpful to show that you were both there, both paying the bills, and both responsible for the household at the same time. Other things that you can use to show that you have a joint residence can be other types of important documents you might have where you both have the same address on on the documents. So an example might be you could copy both of your driver's licenses and they both show the address where you live. Or and if you haven't updated your driver's license, update your driver's license. Or if you file joint tax returns together and that shows your address too. So things like that can be helpful as well. If you're receiving important documents, paycheck stubs or anything like that, and it has the current same address on there, all great proof that you have a joint residence. Next category, financial commingling, which just basically means you have to some degree started to combine your financial lives together. You have, your money isn't totally separate. In the modern world, of course, couples all have a different arrangement for how they want to do their money. And so for some people, they have everything together in a joint account. Probably it's more common this day and age for people to have kind of separate accounts or some degree of separation and joint things like that. If you do have joint expenses that you both contribute toward, I would say it's always better to have an account where you can actually both put money into it and pay the household bills out of that. And then that's a very common setup that I see a lot of people do. I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but definitely don't create any kind of evidence for immigration purposes. It's not going to help you because it's going to be clear that you're not actually using it and that is something that you just created for immigration purposes, which is fraud, and you don't want to do that. But if you are just looking at, hey, what's the most organized way for us to do this and pay this together, then it's something to keep in mind when you initially set up your finances together. Immigration is not going to say, hey, you each have your own separate account too. What's this about? They just want to see how the story makes sense. So how do you pay your bills, whether it's one partner working and the other partner staying home, or both together, or one partner's working while the other waits for their green card to come so that they can, contribute. We just want a story that makes sense. Other ways that you can join your finances together involve things like, so that we have the joint bank accounts. You could have joint credit card accounts together. You might have insurance policies together, whether you're on your partner's health insurance or life insurance plan. You're maybe a life insurance beneficiary if your spouse were to die. Maybe you have co-signed loans, mortgages together, or you jointly file your tax returns together. And those are also all great types of evidence of ways that you can show that you have joined your finances together to the degree that you have. The next category is affidavits. So a fancy way to say a sworn statement from witnesses to your relationship. So if you think about it, between your family and your friends and your coworkers and other people in your life, probably a lot of people are aware that you have this marriage and you've been together, you dated for however long. They might be aware of the ceremony that you had. They might be aware of how you're currently living together as a married couple. So you can actually recruit some people to write you a letter to the US government where they actually say, yeah, I've seen this. This is true. So if someone agrees to do that, the important things to include would be they need to include their full name. They need to include their address where they live. They need to include their date and place of birth. And then they need to really talk in as much specific detail as they can about what they've witnessed in your relationship. How do they know that you're a couple? So, here's an example of what you wouldn't want them to say. Hey, this couple, they're really great and I've known them for a long time and they make a really cute couple. Because basically that didn't tell us very much detail at all about this specific person. You could say that about anyone. It's just a very generic thing to say. It would be much better if they said something like, I remember the first time I met, I always say, well, my brother, obviously I've known my whole life. And then I remember when I first met his wife, when they were first dating, he brought her home for Thanksgiving this year, and we all thought she was great. And then they dated, and we, usually saw each other on Thursday afternoons because that's our family meal night, or we, and it could be a totally different scenario, right? Whatever the scenario is for you. And then it can be, oh, and I attended their wedding, and actually I, read something at the wedding, and then since then I've seen them at major holidays and blah, blah, blah. But just something that's like more concrete and more specific about how they actually know you. So they're really, it doesn't matter so much what they say, but it just matters that it's true and that it makes sense and that it's specific, so that it's clear that there's, something that the government could actually check against if they were trying to determine the validity of that document. If you say, oh, that's a real nice guy, it's kind of like, okay, that doesn't really help that much. So when you get those affidavits, you'll want the people who wrote them to ideally have them notarized, which if they're in the US, they can usually do at their bank for free. If there's no way to get it notarized, especially if it's someone who's in a foreign country, you would at least want them to sign it and date it at the very least, but you'll have more evidentiary weight, or USCIS will consider it more important if it's actually notarized, because it proves this person exists, they had an ID, and someone confirmed that they're the ones who signed it. So affidavits can be very helpful. Next category, photos. I know everyone says, oh, but photos, everything can be faked these days. I mean, yes and no. Obviously, don't submit anything fake to immigration, as I mentioned before, but it actually can be really great evidence of, going through the photos that you've taken over the course of your relationship. So I like to see a variety of photos, not a ton. I'm talking like maybe 20 to 25 photos is usually the sweet spot if they're well-selected photos. So you'll want to have things where it's the two of you together in certain places maybe that are identifiable, like, oh yeah, here's when we went to this place for vacation, or here's us at this family celebration. Photos of you with family members, with friends, with coworkers, all of those other outside pieces in the photos make them better evidence than just a whole bunch of selfies of just your faces, which is not typically as good of evidence. So you want to have that variety. It's great if you can show time passing. Maybe you have different haircuts or different looks, or it's a different type of weather outside. Then you really show your relationship over time through those photos. And it's great if you can put a caption at the bottom to say when and where it was, and who's in the photo, if at all possible. If you've taken any trips together as a couple, or even when you were just dating before you got married, vacations or other types of travel together are great evidence that you're really a couple. So, your flights, if you had flights, or your hotel receipts, and then maybe some photos to support it as well, just showing all the places that you've been. This obviously applies more to some couples than others, especially if you're living Actually, yeah, well, let's shift to talking about people who don't live together. As I mentioned before, I'd circle back around. So if you happen to be living apart in different countries, then the evidence that you've traveled back and forth to see each other can be really, really critical evidence to show that you have this ongoing relationship. You might be showing that, one partner's passport was stamped, or they have a visa to the other country, or the times that you've been able to come back and forth to see each other. You also might want to rely more on evidence that you communicate regularly, oh my gosh, what is wrong with my tongue today? Regularly with each other, if you're living far apart, whether it's inside the US or in different countries. So you can screenshot things like text messages, or if you have a certain messaging app you use. Obviously, don't send immigration like everything you ever said from your whole life, but you can kind of screenshot some things at a regular interval to show. So maybe you have beginning of the month, middle of the month, beginning of the month, middle of the month, or something like that over a span of time to show that this is an ongoing sort of conversation. So that can all be great evidence. If you don't live together, there's still a way to show these things. So hopefully this gives you some good ideas. I have definitely used lots of things that are even outside of what I've mentioned here today, but I think for the vast majority of couples, the things I've mentioned should really get your wheels turning about what is good evidence to submit, what proves your life together as a couple, and I wish you the very best of luck on your immigration journey.